But yeah, after 15 months of a brutal genocidal war against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and a threat of a wider regional war by the Zionist state of Israel, we now have a ceasefire agreement. I think the first thing I want to mention is that in spite of everything, faced with the biggest imperialist power in the region, one of the greatest imperialist powers in the world, armed to the teeth by the Western powers, the people of Gaza didn't give up. And Israel did not achieve its aims, actually. Its main stated aims, it did not achieve. So in that sense, Israel did not win, which in and of itself is, I'm not sure I'd call it a victory, given what's happened, but I think that is important to mention. The fallout from this ceasefire, obviously many people are relieved. Many Palestinians living in Gaza are definitely relieved. And I think there's a big section of the Israeli population that's also relieved, because there's people that have been demanding this end so they can get the release of the hostages. But yeah, now that the dust has settled, I think many people are asking, like, what the hell was this for? What was this about even? Official death toll has now, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, been upgraded to around 62,000 dead. Although it's likely higher than that. The Lancet, which is a respected medical journal, puts the direct and indirect deaths at as high as 186,000, maybe, I don't know. But that in and of itself is, the situation is just to give you a picture, it's atrocious. 90% of the population has been displaced. Again, Gaza has effectively been leveled. Healthcare and education facilities decimated. This will take decades and decades to rebuild. It will take decades likely just to clear the rubble so that you can rebuild. That is the situation that we have now in Gaza. It's an absolute horrible, I guess, like barbaric situation that was created by Western imperialism. After, you grow up in a country like Canada, you're told, what are you told when you grow up? We're about peace and democracy, right? We're peacekeepers. What do we have? Our government supported this the whole way, all the way through, along with the USA, France, Britain, all of the Western democracies, have supported an absolute atrocity. So I think it's important to state what's what. That's what's taking place here. All the bullshit you normally hear in the West it's precisely that. It's just hypocritical nonsense. When their imperialist interests are at stake, they throw all that out the window. We all remember what they said about Ukraine. It was the exact opposite. It was, we better support these poor people that are getting bombed and having their sovereignty violated. You do not have the same thing apply to the Palestinians. So yeah, that is the situation. But yeah, an interesting point here is how the ceasefire deal came about. I'm not sure if everyone followed it. It was very peculiar. Because you had liberal governments like ours saying things like, oh, don't bomb hospitals and don't kill too many people, and like, you're going too far. Even Biden tried to kind of seemingly restrain Netanyahu while still giving him all the guns in the world. But the liberals were not the ones who engineered this ceasefire deal. It has become clear that that is the case. They asked Biden if Trump had anything to do with it, and he said, is that a joke? But it actually seems like it was Trump people that pushed this through, which does tell us something. Yeah, it actually was, I think it was the weekend before Trump's inauguration, a guy named Stephen Witkoff, who's a big billionaire real estate developer like Trump. He's Trump's buddy. He wasn't even in an official position because Trump wasn't even in power yet, but Trump had obviously promised to put an end to this. And Trump likes having wins. He's an ego guy. So he sent him to the negotiations in Qatar, in Doha. And Stephen Witkoff, he noticed right away that the Israelis were not serious. and they were delaying, as they have been delaying for a long time, and torpedoing and sabotaging all the negotiations. Witkoff being a Trump-type guy with a, I don't know, we don't really know what was going on behind the scenes, but he came there with some sort of mandate, and he told Netanyahu, we're going to meet on Saturday. And Netanyahu said, we can't meet on Saturday, that's a Sabbath. And Witkoff said, we don't know exactly what he said, but he forced a meeting on the Sabbath, which in and of itself is somewhat extraordinary. Apparently the meeting was tense. They use these words to describe something a bit out of the ordinary. And they came up with the ceasefire deal. The interesting thing about the ceasefire deal is in all the fundamentals, it's basically exactly the same deal that was on the table in May last year that Hamas had agreed to. That deal, if you remember, there was a lot of people that were very excited. Oh yes, we're going to get a deal finally. And at the very last minute, Netanyahu said, oh no, we can't have this deal. Why? Because the deal includes Israel pulling out of the Philadelphia corridor, which is a small strip of land between Israel, or between Gaza and Egypt. And he said, that's our national security interest. We cannot accept that. All of a sudden, at the last minute, and it was clear that he injected that at the last minute in order to destroy the deal, because Netanyahu needed the war for his own personal and political reasons to keep himself politically alive, potentially even physically alive. And this was exactly the same deal. What is it now, 8 months later? What the hell is going on? So yeah, I think one thing we have to actually say is Trump, or through his people, forced a deal through on a ceasefire that Biden was either unwilling or unable to do so. I think it was unwilling to do so. We can talk about that a bit, but this is one thing, the liberals did not do this. He was withdrawing troops from the Philadelphia corridor, doing a bunch of stuff that they never said they were going to do. This is quite incredible. So really the ultimate thing is Biden looks like an idiot. He's quite discredited. Of course, Trump likes that. And I do think, in fact, that throughout the entire thing, if Biden really wanted to, the United States did have the ability to pressure Netanyahu into some kind of ceasefire. We don't know what happened in the negotiations if Witkoff, on behalf of Trump, threatened to withhold arms or something else. Maybe. He obviously would have had to do something pretty serious to get their attention. Maybe he dangled a carrot. This carrot seems to be normalization with Saudi Arabia, which Israel wants for trade purposes. We'll see what happens. But I think it is important to say that this was actually done by Trump. And Biden is very discredited out of this. What is going on behind all of this? Because it's very confusing, all these weird diplomatic maneuvers and things like that. But I think behind all this, you have a split in the American ruling class. You have Biden, who represents the establishment old guard, that grew up in the Cold War period and is accustomed to this American empire, right? That after World War II, the US became the number one capitalist power. Europe was decimated, and it basically became the United States versus the Soviet Union. And you had a certain balancing act there. And the United States kind of imposed its will on the capitalist world for a period of time. But then the Soviet Union fell. And you had the 90s as the end of history, right? That's what Francis Fukuyama said. No more revolutions, no more communism, just capitalism is the best of all systems. And America, that's the way to go. And America imposed its will on everybody. And with great power comes great arrogance. And the American politicians, like Biden, like George Bush, like these types of people, became extremely arrogant. And they thought that they could just continue to impose their will on the entire world. They brought capitalism back to Russia, you know? They encouraged China to go on the capitalist road, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the world situation we're faced with today. And actually, they're reaping what they've sown, as we'll get to. So, yeah, the other side is Trump. That's the Biden wing. And their wing thought, we can't give up anything. If anyone threatens us, we must smash them. If anyone threatens us or any of our allies, we can never give up anything. The Iraq War is an example of that. Afghanistan's an example of that. But what's the result of this? People can see the failures in Iraq, the absolute failure in Iraq, which actually, from the standpoint of the interests of US imperialism, what were the interests? A little bit of oil, maybe? How much money did they spend? How much did they destabilize? So there's a wing of the US ruling class that has bent the other way and goes, we don't want to be involved in these, Trump calls it, forever wars. We don't want to waste our money on the other side of the planet for something that doesn't even pay off in the end. And so you have these two different trends in the American ruling class. One that wants to not give up its spheres of influence, even though it's losing power and it can't hold on to them. And Trump's basically seemingly saying, we don't care so much about things in a far-off land. He says he wants peace in the Middle East. I'm not sure he wants peace so much as he just doesn't want to be having to bring the US in all the time to police everything. Anyway, that's a bit more complicated. We'll get into that more later. Back to the ceasefire deal and back to the current situation. So one of the stated aims, like I said, Israel did not meet its main stated aims. One of them was destroy Hamas. And that's why you had this weird contradiction where they said it was all about the hostages, but then Hamas said, okay, we're ready to negotiate hostages, and they said, no, we're going to kill you. And they're like, what? Because we want to make sure no hostages are ever taken ever again. So they want to wipe out Hamas. And they failed, miserably. They miserably failed, even in spite of the fact that a lot of the families were demanding, put an end to the war so we can get the hostages back. They miserably failed. Hamas has not been destroyed. Hamas is a potent force still. If you follow what's happened immediately after the ceasefire and when Israeli troops are being withdrawn, Hamas is out and quite public, and a public display of force, actually. And actually, I believe because of what's happened, Hamas has a renewed popularity all over the Middle East. Because seen as resisting this, right? They're fighters, resistors. They call them terrorists over here, of course. Just the terrorist thing is if you oppose America's interests, you're a terrorist. If you don't, you're a freedom fighter. You know, they said that about the Taliban in the past. And then when they oppose US, they're terrorists. Yes, and I do believe Hamas is weakened. Like they've been carpet bombed and they've been hiding in tunnels for 15 months. They're weakened, but according to US intelligence reports, Hamas has recruited 15,000 members. If you compare that to what Israel said they've killed about 15,000 Hamas fighters. So personnel they're about the same. There's actually a brigadier general from the IDF, retired brigadier general, who was quoted in the mainstream media saying, we are in a situation where the pace at which Hamas is rebuilding itself, this is when the war was going on, we're in a situation where the pace at which Hamas is rebuilding itself is higher than the pace that the IDF is eradicating them. And you see this folly of trying to eliminate Hamas militarily. You can't do it. Actually, it's embedded in the population. And if you're a young Gazan, why wouldn't you join? Like lots of people just join Hamas because they're the ones seen to be fighting. They're the ones fighting, right? That's basically the situation. So I do believe Hamas has been weakened, but they have not been destroyed. And they're in control of the Gaza Strip decisively still. Yes. And I think that's quite an extraordinary point. You think they've been hiding in tunnels 15 months and now they're out and they're in control of everything. And they're rebuilding their force. So basically the situation is more or less, obviously Gaza's been decimated, but in terms of Hamas, it's back to October 6th, 2023. This in and of itself is a humiliation, I believe, for the Israeli state. And this leads me to what's happening inside Israel. Because in the last few years, there's been a increasingly divisive situation inside Israel. which is actually what got us here in the first place, because Netanyahu's had to ally with these far-right religious Zionists and settler movement people. But yeah, this is a humiliation for Israel, and I believe this is leading to a reckoning inside Israel, because Israel as a state was built on a myth. It was built on the idea that Jews can only be safe if we go to this place that was promised to us in a holy book a long time ago, you know? And and then the state is strong, and we all have the same interests if we band together against hostile forces, and the state of Israel can keep you safe. I think that has been proven false. That has been proven false. There is this big crisis inside Israel, which I believe is not simply, we are Marxists. We don't believe that crises of this nature are produced by one individual, although an individual like Netanyahu or Trump certainly accelerate things. But I do think there are also symptoms of the general crisis in society. So yeah, the past 15 months of this genocidal campaign against the Palestinians was not simply the result of one deranged man, being Netanyahu, but I believe that Netanyahu and the current formation of his government is a product of a societal crisis inside Israel. And it has some similarity to everywhere, which is you have capitalism in crisis, living conditions being dragged down, and you have a polarization and a bit of a radicalization in society as people look for answers. Netanyahu's been in power for much of the last 25 years, I believe, something like that. He's a corrupt bastard, like I think any capitalist politician, but probably worse in many ways. There's court cases against him. I think many here probably already know that. Like I said earlier, one of the reasons why he's just continued the war and pushed it further is because he's known that if the war ends, his government falls. And if his government falls, then he loses immunity and he has to go to the courts and he'll be charged with a whole bunch of stuff. Not unlike Trump, actually, although Trump seemed to avoid that for now. Like I said, he's allied with these far right. There's two humans in his cabinet, Smotrich and Gavir, who are these far right. Let's just call them what they are. They're fascists. Like, they believe in exterminating the Palestinians. They've said that, both of them, very clearly, on multiple times. This is how the crisis of capitalism expresses itself in many countries. You have this polarization, and there's political instability. What will the effect? Now, how does the ceasefire play into this situation? Like I said, not immediately, but a whole series of events since October 7th have had a major impact on consciousness of people inside Israel. And I believe it's accelerating this crisis. And it's exploding this myth that the Zionist ruling class has used to stay in power. Like I said, we can guarantee your safety. And a lot of people after October 7th don't believe that anymore. And they're very critical of Netanyahu. It came out in the news that Hamas was supported and funded by Netanyahu against the PLO, up against Fatah. So even the argument that we need to protect you against Hamas, it's like, then why were you funding them? Like, what's going on here? So you clearly see this, and that's a long-standing strategy of Western imperialism, is when you're dealing with an enemy, you fund, well, quite often it's a religious party in opposition in the same area to divide people and play them off against each other. But that's what the Israeli ruling class did, and now they're complaining about Hamas. All these myths have started to be exploded in people's minds. Also, 400 Israeli soldiers were killed, 6,000 were wounded, probably more. Many of the hostages died because of Netanyahu's actions. Many people were upset during the war and wanted it to end. Just last fall, there were quite massive demonstrations. The Histadrut, the Zionist trade union, even called a general strike. I think it wasn't really a general strike, but it was significant nonetheless. And there was a degree of war weariness inside Israel that you didn't normally see. So at the very beginning, there was 100, it's a reservist army, IDF. 100% of reservists showed up for duty at the beginning. By November, that had dropped down to 75%. So you're saying just reservists are not, a quarter are not showing up for active duty. There was a bunch of polls that came out in Haaretz, a liberal Zionist paper that said only 50% of Jewish Israeli families were encouraging their kids to be drafted, which is pretty significant. It means they're losing faith in the war and its aims. That's a warning to the Israeli ruling class that they're playing with fire and they might not be able to rely so much on this. The Israeli economy has taken a massive hit. According to the Bank of Israel, they spent $56 billion on this war, which is about 10% of the GDP of the country, which is quite significant. Israel is a high-tech economy, and a high-tech economy really needs stability, and it actually needs young talent. And when you're drafting all the young people to the war, it messes up your economy. So the Israeli economy has actually taken a huge hit. They need an educated young workforce. And all of these, these are different factors that have been undermining cohesion within Israeli society. And in a country like Israel, that cohesion is extremely important. That is what Zionism is based on, right? So yes, Israel has been exposed as being not so strong, actually. Can't even deal with Hamas, you know? Yeah, so in that sense, it's a bit of a defeat, I would say. Most importantly, a political defeat. And that, you know, Israel is based on a lie, and that lie is being exposed. Now the ceasefire. So Netanyahu clearly did, as I've stated, did not want the ceasefire. Not in his interest. Also, the far right definitely did not want the ceasefire, and he is in alliance with these parties that have been basically propping him up. And he's been kind of bending to them and actually happy to do so because he needs to keep himself alive. Based on the ceasefire, one of those parties left the government, although now I believe they're back in the government. Anyway, we can talk about that later. But one of the parties left the government, and the other was threatening to leave if they do not continue the war in 42 days, which is when one of the, I think the first phase or something, first or second phase is up, I can't remember. So yeah, this isn't a stable, I wouldn't call this a stable ceasefire. I wouldn't call it a stable situation. Now, a few months ago, Netanyahu did bring in a new party, and so he's not completely reliant on the far right anymore. You see, he has been provoking other things. You see what's happened in the West Bank. He's been provoking conflicts in the West Bank. Why? Well, because he still needs this sort of thing to go on. So he tells you a lot about the situation. So yeah, the ceasefire deal in Gaza is actually not in his interest. And so it's not entirely clear if this deal will hold all the way through. It's a few phases. It's like 3 different phases. We can talk about the details if you guys want in the discussion. Netanyahu says he guaranteed to one of the far-right parties in the government that, or to the far right, that he would resume the war in 42 days, which is now going to be in, 20-something days. So I do believe the ceasefire is actually relatively fragile. The Lebanon ceasefire that they signed actually almost broke down. Trump had to intervene to try to make sure that it didn't. So yeah, that is the situation we're facing. There are fault lines inside Israeli society. Basically, similar to what's happened in America, there's a split in the ruling class in Israel between the liberal Zionists, who, don't get me wrong, it's not a split between people who like Palestinians and people who hate them. They're all Zionists, but the Zionist liberals don't like the settler Zionists because they think they're just causing too much problems. And the far right people, they think, you're being too brash. You don't just say kill them all. That's ridiculous. You know, you make us look bad, basically. That's the split. So there is a split. And this is causing a lot of questions and a lot of confusion inside. And inside Israeli society, it's not just one united thing, right? So I do believe that this raises the possibility for that to break down completely and potentially for something else to emerge, maybe on class lines, although I don't think that is happening at the moment. So yeah, in terms of perspectives, like what does this all mean? What's going to happen here? So Trump, in just over 2 weeks, even before he got into office, has already massively transformed world relations. Just a few things. He brokered a ceasefire. He threatened multiple NATO nations, some with military force. He threatened to annex Canada. He even did it a couple days ago. He made a deal with Venezuela, which is an enemy that they did not recognize that government was the government of Venezuela, but they just did a deal with them the other day. But I do believe that the proposals that he made yesterday really trumps all of these other things that he's done so far. So yeah, he met with Netanyahu. That's the first head of state that he's met with officially since taking office, which tells you something. And he proposes that the United States should take over Gaza. I don't know if he thinks that it should become part of the United States. I don't know if they'd like that, but yeah, he thinks they should at least take it over. He was a bit vague. And displace the Palestinians, relocate them to Jordan or Egypt, and rebuild Gaza as an international enclave. He called it the Riviera of the Middle East. He wants to build it as some sort of tourist spot for rich people or something. I'll just quote him to show his logic. "We'll own it, and we will be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site. Get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited number of jobs and housing to the people of the area." Right. That's Trump. This is his logic. He says, we've got to do something different. You just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has been for 100 years. He says, it should not go through a process of rebuilding an occupation by the same people that have lived there and died there and lived a miserable existence there. So he thinks the U.S. has got to come in and fix everything for everybody. He contradicted himself multiple times, as he tends to do. He said he didn't want Israel to settle it, but then later on he said he was open to Israel annexing it. So I'm not exactly sure what the hell he's gonna. Of course, this is Trump. He says a lot of things over the top that I don't even know if he means it or not, but this is what he's saying. Yes, the elephant in the room. Well, what do you do with the Palestinians? And do you think that they're just going to say, okay, we'll move? Trump, he speaks as though he doesn't know anything about what's been going on for the last 70-something years. Like, if you think Palestinians are just going to leave this place, like many people in Israel have insisted on this multiple times and not been able to get anywhere. But Trump thinks that he's going to be able to get away with this. And he said, what did he say? I have it. He basically said, I think they'll agree with me. He's just going to use his personality and force to do it. Netanyahu was a bit shocked by this because he had his arm twisted into the ceasefire deal that he didn't want, and he didn't have any details before he went into this meeting. That's at least what they said. And then he said this about this. He said, man, you say things that others refuse to say. And after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and go, he's right. So this is kind of music to Netanyahu's ears and the far right in his government, there was the one far right party that left after the ceasefire now have come back on the basis of this deal because they're like, hey, that's what we wanted. We wanted to get rid of the Palestinians. That was our whole program. And actually, there was a leaked document from the Israeli cabinet May last year called Gaza 2035, which was very similar to this, actually. It was a plan for a free trade zone in Gaza with no Palestinians in it. Surprise, surprise. Basically a playground for the rich connecting to, this weird mega project that the Saudis are building called Neom, and connect to Egypt. So that was their dream. That leaked. Obviously, it was shot down in cabinet. Someone thought that was a stupid idea. But now Trump's more or less sort of saying this. So yeah, while Netanyahu was originally embarrassed by Trump because of the ceasefire, now he's all happy, and he's buoyed up. And he seems to be relatively stable politically because of this. Trump also gave Netanyahu a bunch of ammunition that was held up, that Biden was holding up. He just fast-tracked it. So it seems like he's trying to give him a way to finish the job. He did say something like that last year, that, maybe they should just finish the job. Trump offhand comment. And Netanyahu said this: Israel will end the war by winning the war. This is what he said yesterday. He basically admitting that the war is not over. The ceasefire is not an end to the war. So I do think that this actually shows something about the ceasefire. A lot of people are excited about the ceasefire. It's a good thing that their troops are withdrawing and the main killing has stopped, but this is not a solution. This is a peace on imperialist terms, actually, and it's not stable. So is it possible for Trump to do this? So yeah, Trump, he's a real estate tycoon. He looks at this thing and he thinks, man, it's beachfront property. We should just, develop it into resorts or something. Completely divorced from the context. Yeah, Gaza is a mess. Nobody wants to live there. Why would you want to live there? Just move the people out and we'll redevelop it. Let's be clear what he's suggesting. He's suggesting a second Nakba. He is suggesting ethnic cleansing the area. That is exactly what he's saying. He didn't say that exactly, but that is what he's saying. The forced expulsion of over 2 million people. A completion of what Israel started many, many, many years ago. Trump, he acts as though he thinks he's the motor force of history. He thinks that he can just force events along a certain road due to his personality and his strength. But history does not move to the will of Donald Trump or anybody else. And I do believe that, as is the case with many of his plans, much like the first time, that he will learn the hard way that it's easier said than done. So yeah, Egypt and Saudi Arabia have already said they're firmly opposed to this. It's not hard to see why. I actually think that politically they cannot accept this. Now these regimes, it's not because they don't, I think they kind of would like it, to be honest. The ruling class, the governments of these countries, the Egyptian military dictatorship and the Saudi Arabia monarchy are horrible, horrible Zionist collaborator bastard regimes. They speak, we support the Palestinians, while crushing dissent, crushing support for Palestinians. Jordan's, I think, even worse. They helped Israel shoot down missiles from Iran, if you guys remember that last year. So these are puppets of U.S. imperialism, collaborators with Israel, and in the region, they are seen as such. They are seen as such by their own populations. So yeah, there's mass anger against the Hashemite monarchy in Jordan. There's mass anger against the military dictatorship in Egypt over many things, standard of living, lots of stuff. There's just social disconnect. But then add on top of it the Palestinian question, especially in Jordan, or around half the population are Palestinian in Jordan. So you can imagine there's a kind of connection there. Now, Saudi Arabia, that's a big one. That's a big player in the region. Trump has promised the resumption of the Abraham Accords. If you know what that is, that's something that was in the works before, that were cut short by the war. It's normalization of Arab regimes with Israel. And they did it with a number of them. UAE, not Qatar, I can't remember. There was a few. And Saudi Arabia was in the mix right before October 7th happened. And that cut it short. Now, I do believe Israeli and Saudi Arabian capitalism would like this. Normalization, trade. They can make a lot of money, make a lot of profit from that. But Saudi Arabia could never accept a solution that does not include a Palestinian state of some sort. If you're basically just wipe it off the face of the map, no more Palestinians, they wouldn't be able to sell that to their population. It would lead to extreme internal turmoil, and I think religiously, maybe even terrorist attacks against the Saudi monarchy, because there are groups like that inside Saudi Arabia who are very pissed off. So yeah, and we shouldn't forget that the masses of the region, the Middle East, see the Palestinian struggle as their struggle, and they're disgusted by the situation. So many of these regimes are walking on thin ice. Also, there's another question. Trump talks as though you could just move over 2 million people and that wouldn't cause a huge problem politically. But you move over 2 million people, you're moving Hamas as well. It's kind of like, you remember when Israel was saying, oh, well, we're not bombing civilians intentionally. We send them text messages telling them to move. I was like, and you send everyone but Hamas those text messages? It's kind of like, Hamas, can you stand over there as we bomb you and everyone else stand over here? That's not really how it works. So if they try to move everyone, everyone goes together. If they move a lot of these people to Egypt, Hamas, that would massively strengthen the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the main opposition party, which the Egyptian military dictatorship does not want. But that would be similar in many countries. They move these people, this is what happens. So the ruling class of these different countries, the governments, they don't want that destabilization. So yeah, Trump, using his sort of art of the deal negotiating techniques, he might be trying to leverage U.S., he seems like this is what he's doing all over. He's trying to do that with Canada too. Leverage the U.S. economic might to force countries to accept certain things. He already cut off foreign aid to Jordan. Maybe he's going to use that to try to force Jordan to take, I don't know, 1 million people or something like that. That would be crazy. He hasn't cut off the $1.3 billion aid to Egypt yet. He could, I don't know. That would probably be politically problematic. My point is there's a lot of things that could be flashpoints and cause big crises and problems if he tries to enact his plan. Now, Saudi Arabia is a bit more, they're less reliant on, they're less reliant on the United States. They have essentially pivoted to China over the past number of years. And if Trump tries to push them, that could just backfire because they just go further into the arms of China. And that's not really what they want. So yeah, like I said, the elephant in the room is the Palestinian people in Gaza themselves. Yeah, Trump said this, he said, I don't think they're gonna tell me no. I think Trump has, news for Trump, I think they're gonna tell you to fuck off. He kind of acts as though he's unaware of the political situation in the region. I don't think the Palestinians who put up with the most brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing and genocide are just going to be happy to move to another country after fighting against this for so long. Trump said he may even consider sending U.S. military troops. Think of this. That's basically talking about a U.S. military occupation of Gaza. He will try to do, I don't think he's going to try to do this because that would be the height of ridiculousness, but try to occupy Gaza, try to do what the IDF could not do. Quite an incredible thing to be considering. It is therefore, I think, unlikely that this actually happens, and there would be massive political consequences any way he tried, and massive destabilization. You could see a huge acceleration of developments in the Middle East, could lead to overthrowing of governments in Jordan or Egypt if they agree with this. And it would probably destabilize Israel further and be met with massive opposition inside the United States and other Western countries. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, many people celebrated this ceasefire, but now I think it's dawning on many people that this was only really what Lenin described as an imperialist peace. This is no solution for the Palestinians. And it's actually wrong to limit ourselves just to demands to stop killing. We want to put an end to the situation that led to this in the first place. That is our duty as communists. The situation in Palestine is a brutal crime of imperialism. It was basically created after World War II, the situation after World War II, where the British, particularly the British, played, actually after World War I first, the British played the Jews and Arabs against each other, promising land to Jews and Arabs. Old divide and rule tactics. Now, Israel ultimately came out on top. And since then, it's basically been the main attack dog of American imperialism. So yeah, ultimately we believe that there can be no Palestine free from oppression without eliminating this cancer of imperialism, which uses peoples like small change. Everywhere you see it, using people like small change to get what they want. And I do believe Trump's dystopian plan that he proposed yesterday is just the latest disgusting maneuver by Western imperialism. But yeah, like I said, I do believe it's unlikely to happen. One of the reasons is Western imperialism is on the decline. And I think his general foreign policy is an admission of that. I think we need to I think a lot of people have had trouble getting it through their heads or like trying to figure out what this all means. What, is Trump just crazy? Did he wake up on a bad side of the bed? Like, why is he saying he wants to annex Canada? Why is he threatening to take Greenland from Denmark? Like, why is he threatening to take the Panama Canal with military force? Like, why did he threaten Colombia? Like, he had this thing with Colombia. The pace of these events is also quite startling. He's doing like multiple major diplomatic incidents every day. Some of them just by tweet. But yeah, a lot of people are having trouble making sense of this. I do believe that underneath it all, underneath all the unhinged, sort of strange, over-the-top statements, there is a method. And it gets back to something that I said in the beginning, with his division within the U.S. ruling class. And Trump represents, now I'm not saying because he did the ceasefire, I said he's the one who did the ceasefire, not Biden. I'm making that point because many people have considered Biden the lesser evil and the Democrats the lesser evil. I don't see how you can possibly justify this in the current context. That doesn't mean that I support Trump. Trump's just a different type of imperialist. He has a different strategy. So yeah, he wants to pull out of some of the old spheres of influence where America can't hold on to anymore. And he's pivoting to their more standard neighborhood, or whatever you want to call it, the Americas. Whether or not he'll be able to get away with that is another thing. That's a whole nother discussion we can chat about another time. We actually have a bunch of articles in the latest issue of Communist Revolution over there about what that means, if you're interested. So yes, but yeah, like I said, I do believe Trump's foreign policy is an admission of the decline of U.S. imperialism. So let me put it this way. America in 1960 had about 40% of world GDP. Now that's down to about 26% today. Back in the 60s, like I said, they could just impose themselves on pretty much everybody. They said jump, you said how high, most of the time. And they got used to that. But now what you've had, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, China has been brought into the world market. You have, especially China. Now, don't get me wrong, the United States imperialism is still the dominant imperialist power by far in terms of economic might, in terms of military might. But, as I said, there's been a relative decline, and China's risen quite rapidly, we'd have to say. This makes it so that the U.S. can't just do whatever they want. They can't just do whatever they want. And the last few decades, we've seen that. The power showed its limitations, and everyone sees Iraq, Afghanistan, and guess what's happening right now? They are being defeated in Ukraine. This is basically a proxy war with Russia, and they're using Ukraine as small change, and they are being defeated. So yeah, but Biden was the wing that refused to accept this limitation. That's why he pushed Zelensky into this situation, told him not to accept a deal with Putin. And this is why he gave Netanyahu a blank check. But Trump is the one who wants to pull that back a bit. Not that he wants peace. He's a different type of imperialist. He bombed a bunch of he said there were I don't know, it might be true, some ISIS members in Somalia the other day. That seems to be the type of method he chooses. But yeah, this is American imperialism is weakened and it's declining, and actually Trump is an example of that. He wants to build a new world order. I do believe this is the most fundamental shift in world relations since World War II. It is the most fundamental shift, and it's not just one crazy guy. There's a significant section of the American ruling class that's pivoted that way. Don't care about the old alliances. He said this about Canada. Why are we doing this? just because of tradition. I don't care about that. So yeah, he doesn't want to get sucked into long drawn out wars in the Middle East. But there's a contradiction between what Trump wants, what Netanyahu wants, what the Palestinians will accept, and what various Arab regimes will accept. So this is a big powder keg waiting to explode at some point, in one way or another. So yeah, the Trump wing of the ruling class is really just the sort of mask off. Biden will say, we're here to defend democracy. No. Trump says, I want to take Greenland because they have resources up there and we can put military bases. He doesn't sugarcoat it. And so the effect of this, that this is having already and is going to have, is that many people will, quite often liberal politicians, they're very crafty at fooling people. Trump, he doesn't even try. Well, he fools people in a different way, but he just bluntly states what American imperialism wants. We want to take this, we want to take that, I'm going to build a resort in Gaza and kick everyone out. That's like, it doesn't talk about protecting democracy or women's rights or sovereignty like they did to justify the invasion of Afghanistan or Iraq. He doesn't care for any of this hypocritical stuff. So yeah, this is the system with its mask off. I don't know if you remember, a good example of this is, have you ever saw this interview he did where some CNN reporter was goading him and trying to get him to say that whether or not he supported Putin in the war in Ukraine? And he said, I don't support, so you support Putin? He's like, I want people to stop dying. That's what he said. And then he said, and they said, yeah, but Putin's a murderer. And he said, do you think we're so innocent? We got lots of murderers on our side. Now, as a representative of American imperialism, you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that. So I think that the liberals actually partially don't like him because he just says the quiet part out loud. Dude, no, we're not murderers. We bring peace. Who cares how many people we killed in Iraq, But this is basically what Trump represents. And this, I believe, is going to massively accelerate revolutionary developments. I know what seems like on the surface and what a lot of people on the left are moaning about is it's like a turn to the right everywhere. We might have a Polyev government. You got Farage in the UK's leading in the polls. You got right-wing populist parties leading in Germany, Austria, France. Maybe Le Pen takes power. That's possible. But I don't believe that means that there's this huge swing to the right in the population. I think the left has capitulated. The mainstream left has capitulated and failed. And the right wing, these right wing people like Trump, they use this populist anti-establishment rhetoric that's quite popular. He even talked about being the man of peace. He said he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know if that's why he did the ceasefire or not. But yeah, this is the situation that's happening in world relations. And I got to wrap up. I'm very sorry, Chairman. So yes, so I do believe this will accelerate revolutionary developments all over the world. I do believe it will accelerate revolutionary developments in the Middle East. And I think there is massive revolutionary potential and hope, actually, for Palestinians. I think on their own, it's silly to think that it's just going to be solved in Palestine. It's not going to just be solved in Palestine. I think that's been conclusively proven over decades. Palestinians have fought like lions. They've done everything in their power, and they haven't been able to overcome the might of one of the most powerful military states in the world. That's not their fault. It's going to take a much wider movement, an internationalist movement, and this is what communists propose, a revolutionary movement of the masses of the whole region, of the working class, to fight against Zionism, to fight against imperialism, and to fight against the reactionary Arab regimes that support imperialism and have been complicit in this atrocity. So Trump is right in a sense when he says we can't just go back to what was happening before. He is right. We can't just go back to what's happening before. But his solution is the worst option. It is the absolute worst option. That's not going to solve anything. And he's not going to be, even if he tried to carry it out, I don't think it would work, or he wouldn't be able to anyway. So yes, the situation that Trump is correctly saying we can't go back to is complete situation of barbarism, Swiss cheese, little enclaves of impoverished people. You hear the Canadian government and like a lot of Western governments, even a lot of people on the left, I support the two-state solution. I think that's complete utopia. It's two states? Where? What are we talking about? This is a complete utopian position made up that people are holding on to from the past. There is no solution here. There is no solution with the existence of imperialism, with the existence of Zionist imperialism, threats from Zionism, stealing land. And on purely military terms, the Palestinians, I think it's been proven, cannot defeat Zionism on their own. I think this is a struggle for the masses, the working class of the entire region. Now, I don't want to overstress this point, but like I said, I do think there is the future will show, because a lot of these myths of Zionism have been exposed, cracks within Israeli society, and maybe some potential from within Israel, although it looks quite unlikely at the moment. It's got to be a struggle of the entire working class of the whole region against imperialism, against Zionism, against the reactionary Arab regimes that are basically puppets of U.S. imperialism, and for a socialist federation of the Middle East, where we can put an end to the fighting over land. There's enough resources to go around. A lot of these regimes, especially Gulf states, are massively wealthy. We could use that wealth to solve all these problems. Not in the way that Trump's saying. He's going to bring in American wealth to evict people and create a resort. I'm saying if the working class of the region has democratic control over the massive amounts of wealth produced in the region, you can start ending the source of a lot of these conflicts. I'll leave it at that.